Hey, Honors, how's it going today?
Good, thanks. How are you, Austin?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good, pretty good. Thanks for taking the time.
Of
So wanted to
course.
kind of talk a little bit about Berlin Pacific today, right? So just kind of learn a little bit before our time here today. But I learned that you guys are specializing in transforming WAN, internet, voice, mobile bills. I mean, from chaotic messes. I mean, we've all seen it. You're coming in really streamlining, cost-effective powerhouse. Um, you know, Tell me a little bit more. I mean, I could probably go on forever on what I discovered, but tell me a little bit about Berlin Pacific and a little bit about yourself and dive into some questions, you know?
I have a background in IT infrastructure management, and I started working in this area because I was working for partly as a sales engineer, helping with get visibility with network management software. And I working there, I saw how important it was to have visibility, how people, wanted visibility into how their network worked. But I was also noticed that people didn't really have a lot of visibility into all the expenses associated with their network, especially all the money they were spending with big companies like AT&T and T and Verizon and also, people just didn't really have time. People really weren't that interested in really getting into the details of it, but they were spending, large amounts of money. I mean, even a smaller organization could spend $100,000 a year to millions of dollars a year if you just have, a few thousand employees. So that got me really interested, and I was like, I've kind of heard these bills are a nightmare. Went and looked into it. Turns out they are very difficult to deal with, as I think most people are aware, even just looking at their old school cell phone bills, and they were more complicated. And so I just started getting into helping companies save money, and I discovered I could save them a lot of money. I mean, it's crazy, but it's often we can save, typically, I would say actually, we can save 50% of landline spend on your WAN, internet, voice services, and that number is still there, which is surprising.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you must have helped, like you said, you probably helped clients save millions on WAN, internet, and voice services. Got to ask you, where do those savings typically come from?
Well, typically what happens is, most clients they just look at the bill every month, and if there's anything glaring which stands out between the two bills, they catch it and then they renegotiate their contracts. So what we found is, well, where do the savings come from? We find that in a typical budget, once you get into the granular details of it, you discover that honestly, about 50% of it is for services you really need and are priced fairly. And then I would say maybe 5 to 10% of your budget is spent on billing errors and things we could probably need to get a credit back to your vendor. But uh, realistically, probably around 20, 25% of your budget, if you have, lots of locations, lots of bills, lots of spending. 20, 25% of those services are things you don't really need anymore or are really underutilized and you could radically downsize. And I would say about I've worked with over 100 companies, so I've seen maybe around 20, 25% of the budget is on overpriced services. And one of the crazy things is, especially in telecom, is nobody really knows what anything should cost. You have a sense, but it's hard to know, is that thing you're paying, $1,500 for now, is that really gone down to $1,000, or is that actually $1,500? Is that actually a really good price today? It's hard to know that without having inside information. So that's typically what we've seen break down the savings is, it's a mix of like unused, underutilized services and getting you better pricing, which one way or the other. So,
Yeah, I mean, finding better pricing never the easiest thing, right? I mean, especially nowadays, always trying to look for the best price and save budget. I guess what would you say are the biggest myths companies believe about managing telecom costs or vendor costs, right?
well, I think I think sometimes people think they don't know. I think a lot of times people think it's not possible to do any better. And I think a lot of people aren't aware that they don't even have an inventory, so they're not even starting to manage what they're buying on a granular level. Other people are correct in that it is a lot of work, to do this, but they also don't realize that if you can bring in an outside expert who follows a process like what we follow, and there are other people like me who I met, You can get them to basically do all the work and manage the project for you. And you, as a decision maker, you don't really have to do anything. You can just sit back and make decisions, and you can get somebody else to do all the research, do all the implementation work. I think another, I don't know if this is a myth, but another thing too is consistent follow through is really important. We definitely find that some of the cost savings discoveries we have are things the clients were kind of aware of, but they thought had been fixed by their vendor, but they didn't have a way to follow through with the vendor consistently and make sure they'd actually fix the things they said they were going to.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I heard you mention awareness, right?
Yeah.
Awareness, we'll say visibility, right? When you're looking at, managing IT vendor spend,
hmm
in the big picture, why is that important to begin with? Why is it so important?
Well, why is what so important?
Um, why is it so important in managing IT vendor spend, right? So
Visibility? What's it?
how does awareness and visibility come
Oh,
into managing
yeah.
that IT vendor spend, and why is that important?
Absolutely. And so what I've seen is the typical way a lot of these bills are managed. Even if you go into a client's ERP system, they just have a bunch of entries saying like, oh, we paid Verizon $6,000 on this bill, and we paid AT&T $20,000 on this bill, and we paid Lumen like 10,000 over here. And they don't really have any visibility into the details. So what are the individual costs which got rolled up to create that bill? So I'll give an example of a client I worked with where they had a $7,000 a month bill with Verizon. And you would, if you literally flip through it, I'm sure you still have a copy of it somewhere, you would see pretty much no information about what the bill was for. And the client knew it was very important. But if there was literally no information as to what the individual services were. So when you don't have any visibility, you're just like, okay, this is important, I pay it. And then what we did to achieve visibility is we got the data from Verizon. We said, hey, tell us, what are the different services and charges making up this bill? And we discovered something very interesting, which was that about half of it was, in fact, very important services. It was about $3,500 a month for internet and WAN services for their headquarters, and that's definitely super important. You want to keep paying that bill because if that goes away, everyone's going to be very unhappy. The owner of the company is not going to be pleased, to put it mildly. But the other half of the bill was for services which were literally legacy services, weren't really being used for anything. Got rid of them all. That saved $3,500 a month, but we couldn't identify what was needed and what wasn't needed without having visibility into the details. And so that's always the first step for us, and is to create visibility. And so what you want to do is, instead of just saying, approved because the bill looks like last month's bill. What you want to do is you want to have somebody periodically go through and look at every single charge and say, is this something we still need? Is this something which is being billed correctly at the right rate? And is there a way to get better pricing on this? And just ask those three questions. And yeah, it works for cloud services. Actually, pretty much any vendor service could be, health insurance, whatever you're
No,
paying for.
yeah, I mean that makes sense. I mean, so while we're on the topic of vendor spend, I guess what would you say are the most common signs, a company lacks control over their IT vendor spend?
Well, I think the big one is the lack of an inventory and being able to establish, okay, what are all these different costs which are rolling up into our budget? And this is especially the case when it comes to things like, cloud services, telecom services. There's just so many different charges every month, and nobody really knows what those charges are, and why each charge is justified, and why each charge is validated, and there's no way to do that. So that's usually the big flag. There's big red flag. There's no inventory. And the great news is that if you do have an inventory, then you have this amazing foundation where anytime you meet an expert who can understands how to get you better pricing, or understands just how to find out if you're being taken for a ride by your vendors and being charged for things you don't really need to pay for. Maybe they're billing errors, maybe they're new services. once you have that inventory, you just hand them that inventory, which has happened to me a few times, where I've been lucky enough to have clients who have inventories, and I'm able to go in, take a look at that data, and come back really quickly and say, "Hey, there's some additional cost savings here you guys weren't aware of. No big surprise, your vendor wouldn't tell you about that, but since I don't work for your vendor, I can tell you, and here's how to save some money, and we'll take care of it for you."
Yeah, I mean, one vendor is gonna tell you, hey, you could save money here, right?
Yeah, exactly. I know talking to people who work for companies like AT&T is that if you are a sales rep and you try to do the right thing for your client, you could actually get in trouble because your manager is going to be like, well, I see that there's $100,000, which less that your client is spending. So how are you going to make up that $100,000 decrease in revenue? And
Yeah.
that's not an easy question to answer. So it's easier for the sales reps to not do anything until the client insists on making a change.
And I mean, let alone, I mean, the IT departments are busy, right? I mean, they've
Yes.
got a million things on their plate, and time is money, time is everything, and I'm sure the CFO would also like to hear there could be some savings, right? But how do you do that when you don't have the time? Gotta
I
ask.
think that's the main problem.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, almost all my clients are smart and they've done a good job of catching the big things. Sometimes they also catch things where they're like, hey, I know something's seriously wrong, but I don't have time to figure this out. And they call me in. And I think I've had maybe one client where I thought they really weren't winding the store. But yeah, they're usually a small team. They're managing lots and lots of locations. They have a network to run and an IT department to run. So they don't have time to spend a couple hours a day looking at telecom bills. And then they also don't have time to spend chasing the vendors to get them to do what they want. But fortunately, we have that time. So
yeah, yeah. That's never easy. So I gotta ask. I mean, we've talked about a lot of saving money, saving budget, a little bit of the departments. You could ask, what's the largest amount of money you've helped companies recover or save, and how did you do it? I mean, the kind of the steps on that.
sure. Well, one of the biggest projects which comes to mind was about we discovered about $1 million a year in recurring savings, and this
Wow.
was a multi-step project. We worked with them for several years. But initially, what we discovered was, they didn't have an inventory, so we created that inventory. And we discovered a few things which were interesting, like $400 a month MPLS ports, which Lumen was billing them for like $2,000, $3,000 a month. There were some things like that. Got rid of that. There were some, I think there was a large credit lying in an account, which they weren't aware of when we started with them. Fortunately, we got that moved onto their books. And then we have found lots of unused services. I think the most dramatic thing we found was an entire data center. They had moved out of about 18 months previously, and there was $300,000 a year in network services from Lumen just in that one data center. So
Wow.
that was like a huge win. And the client said, "Oh, this is great. Like we didn't have to do any work. Really appreciate this." And so they were really pleased by it. And we just discovered a lot of interesting things, just sort of working with Lumen, their vendor, where Lumen would charge them for things like let's say they'd gotten rid of an internet connection and they had like a DDoS service to protect the internet connection. Well, Lumen would keep charging them for the DDoS service, even though the underlying service was gone. And then another thing Lumen did, which was crazy, was uh, they had a bunch of point-to-point circuits, and so the client, very clearly told the vendor, like, "Hey, we're moving out of this location, shut down, the circuit." So Lumen was like, "Okay, sure." So all they did is they shut down the headquarters half of the location, and then they kept billing them for the other halves of these point-to-point circuits, which doesn't make any sense because the circuits aren't functional if they're you can't use half a circuit in that case. So, and it's not the first time we've seen like a circuit to nowhere. So yeah, that was how we helped them, and it saved a huge amount of money.
That's awesome. I mean, that's a big chunk of change right there. I'm sure any company would be happy to recover and save, and Wow, man. So I got to ask too, there's a lot of sophisticated systems out there. There's a lot of tools. We get messages for them daily, right, in our inboxes. Why are the billing errors still even happening in 2025, right? You've got AI, you've got some sophisticated systems. What's going on? And what are you seeing and how are you helping?
Well, that's a complex question. Well, okay, so in terms of AI and billing errors, yeah, it's very frustrating that there are still billing errors. I've talked to some people who've worked in the back end of billing and for big telecoms around the world, and it does sound like their systems are kind of as archaic and they work, but they also are archaic and they don't even the vendors don't really understand where all the money is coming from and they don't have a way to easily identify things. And so I think that's part of it. It's just sort of these old sort of relic systems. And then haven't seen a lot of I haven't seen a lot of push for AI to, I know there's some people who are building systems to check bills for that. Now that is good. Now the problem though, in order to check the billing errors, you first have to have the contract. And so a lot of clients don't even have the contracts available. So you'd have to gather all the contracts from people, dump that into the system. But I think actually AI could help a lot. And we've been doing some stuff with using that for, validating for kind of comparing bills and seeing what the differences are. And so there are some things you could do with AI just on billing errors. What I've found though, just with the tools in general, is tools can do foundational things like get you all the data, create you an inventory, get you visibility, but you still need people to actually do the work. So one complaint I've heard a lot is, well, your TEM system or your TEM service, all it does is it gives me a new task list. And I have enough tasks as it is today. I don't need more tasks on my plate. So we offer a done for you service where we come in and we don't just come up with ideas and leave them to you to execute. We follow through with those ideas, which after you approve them, and we make sure the vendors implement everything and everything gets fixed. So that takes, I think, the human touch still. And also we help with negotiating pricing and figuring out how to get you the best discounts and just sort of who to talk to in the organization at your vendors who will make sure you're getting fair pricing, which other people are getting. So I think that still all requires a human touch. I'm hopeful at some point that there may be some helpful AI agent systems which will kind of help watch the vendor and make sure the vendor follows through on the tasks they're supposed to do. That would be great. But I haven't seen demos of those yet where they look like they're really where they need to be.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you hit it right on the nose. I mean, I worked at Verizon in the early 2000s, and I remember taking bill payments, right? It was a Verizon Plus store, and their system was, built-in DOS, right?
Yeah.
Black, green letters. You're hitting F1, F5, hotkeys. It took you a month just to learn what keys did what, right? And I tell you, the telecom vendors they're always trying to quietly increase the costs, right? They're always trying to do that over time. And there's really no way to kind of find that. So I got to
What
ask
I've
you, I mean,
seen. Mhm.
well, if you're a CIO or an IT leader, right? What should they be watching out for in the telecom and internet service agreements? You mentioned that. So what should they be looking out for, and how do they avoid that quiet increase, right, over time?
Okay. Well, I would say the issue actually is more that they just don't care.
Yeah, good
And
answer.
that's really what it is. So they're not necessarily actively working on going in and sort of sabotaging things and finding ways to increase costs. Now, yeah, they're not doing that yet. They might have to with inflation. But it's more like they're just happy to charge you for things they don't need to charge you for, and they're happy to have billing errors, and they're just not gonna, if it happens, it happens. They're not gonna worry about it and find them on your behalf. It's just, and if you call them on it, they're like, oh, I'm sorry. And yeah, it gives like, we'll try to fix it. And then maybe they will, maybe they won't. So they just don't care. But in terms of, yeah, looking at your new contracts, so I think one of the big things to look out for is definitely things like, does the SLA make any sense? Does it even help you? If you do have a problem, can you leave the vendor if, they really just provide terrible service and your users hate it? I mean, is that actually working? I think another good one would be automatic renewals. So I mean, I think you should always just ask her, hey, just let my service go month to month after I do my, multi-year contract. I've worked with you for a few years. You're good. If you're a good vendor, why would I ever leave? Because nobody wants to leave actually their vendor because all the other vendors are going to offer fairly similar service. So if you're, being easy to work with, like nobody really wants to leave you. So just provide fair pricing. And then, so yeah, so watch out for auto renewals. That is a big one. And sometimes people even try to do, I think, automatic multi-year auto renewals, which I think is even crazier. So it's like, hey, yeah, you signed a 3-year agreement. You don't say anything 30 days before for the renewal. Then you get hit with it locked in for another 3 years, which I think is crazy. Also look at the termination. Clauses. I mean, sometimes the termination clauses can be fairly painless, so actually it is easy to leave, even though you're quote unquote under contract. So that's one of the funny things I see too is people like, oh, I'm under contract, I can't save, and I'm like, well, it really depends on the details of your contract, because maybe you can save. And we typically find that there are workarounds for all of this. And then I think another big one is Mark contracts are very dangerous, so we have a whole paper on that, the ins and outs of that. And then there was one other big one. Another thing they like to do is they pretty much all moved the contracts to say if they misbill you, even if it's totally egregious, you can only go back 6 months. So that is one of the reasons, another reason why we think you should start now because working with us, because if you wait, a few months, well, you're not going to get that money back for those earlier months, and also you're going to lose all the go forward savings. So you lose money every month, and there's no way to get it back.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it sounds like, remember the saying, and it's not how hard you hit the hammer, it's knowing where to hit it. Definitely sounds like you're that man. You've definitely figured it out. I mean, vendor spending's out of control. It's chaotic. I mean, look at streaming platforms. It used to be ad free, right? And now everything's got an ad, and they keep increasing prices. It doesn't
Right,
change
right.
anywhere, right? So, want to send you off here. Tell us, what you're doing. One big message. If I'm a CIO or a CFO watching this, right, and I feel like my spend's probably fine, what would you say to them?
Well, I would love to take a look at it if you're, not spending a lot of money, by which I mean under $100,000 a year, then yeah, maybe you don't want to have us take a look. But I suspect if you're spending $100,000 plus a year, we haven't worked with anyone in ages where we couldn't find 50% savings and execute those for you. And the other good thing is it doesn't cost you anything to find out. So we'll offer you, if you qualify, a complimentary assessment. We'll go in and do a free study, and we'll identify if you can save a lot of money. And if you can't save a lot of money, then you validated that your team is doing everything they can. The good news is you don't have to do any work on your end. We do all the work. We just gather a bunch of vendor data from your vendors, and we do the free study for you, and then we come back with some results. And clients typically start saving within 60 days of kickoff with us. So I don't think you have anything to lose.
Well, I mean, time is money, so you're already saving money on that front. So, hey, Honors, I appreciate it. It was
Yeah,
great getting all this in. If you want to learn more about Berlin Pacific, check them out, www.berlinpacific.com. And you can add Anders here on LinkedIn and shoot us a message.
yeah. I'm Anders Mikkelsen on LinkedIn, so I'm easy to find. I'm probably the only one in New York and definitely the only one who works for Berlin Pacific. So please reach out.
All right, thanks.
All right. Right.